is my review of Solar Opposites. Okay, so this episode marks the start of summer break, at least for the Replicants, and Terry and Korvo aren't particularly happy about the fact that they have to spend some of the Replicants. Also, the murder mystery plot from the wall continues up in this episode, but I'll get to that. So it starts off with Terry and Korvo relaxing and doing what they're currently enjoying. Terry's just kind of getting drunk and laying down on the couch while Korvo works on fixing some of the data crystals for the ship. Whereas they're doing that, Yumulak and Jesse barge in and start arguing and are fighting each other. And when Terry and Korvo question why they're there and why they're not at school, they merely explain that their school has gone on summer vacation and that they're going to be around for a couple of months, which unnerves Terry and Korvo a little bit because they think it's only going to be for like a day or so, but once they find out it's for several months, they just proceed to panic and realize that they can't spend 3 months hanging around the Replicants if they're going to be that loud and obnoxious. And then decide that the best way to actually deal with the situation is to kill the Replicants, and then proceed to discuss several different ways they can kill the Replicants, only for their neighbor to overhear everything and suggest instead that they just send the Replicants to summer camp, which they do instead. So they decide that, they all get in the car, they drive off to the woods where the camp is, and Yumulak expresses his interest in actually succeeding in capture the flag using his bounty hunting skills, while Jessie decides to have a spiritual awakening like her quote-unquote friend Julia did, pointing out that she went to camp as a little girl and when she came back she was a woman, but then proceeds to explain that it may or may not have been a murder mystery in and of itself, since it actually was a different person and they never found Julia. So yeah, that might have been that's just a thing that apparently happened in the background that we never got to see. But in any case, after getting close, Korvo has Terry take a left, which just drives them off the road and into actual woods. And as it turns out, they didn't really understand what camp was. They just were like, "Hey, we drop them off in the woods for a couple of weeks, and then we come back and get them." So they do that. They drop the Replicants off. They drop the car off, go walking in the woods for a little bit, and then drop off the Replicants, saying that they'll see them in a couple of weeks. Though Terry expresses interest in actually staying and camping out, which Korvo is ultimately against, because that was the whole reason they're sending the Replicants to camp in the first place. But as they're walking, it quickly becomes apparent that they don't actually know where the car is. So yeah, they eventually loop around after 2 weeks and eventually find themselves back where they left the Replicants. And the Replicants quickly realize that Korvo and Terry actually don't know how to get back to the car where they left it. So they decide to hang along with, and they decide that Korvo should be the one to lead. So Korvo decides to use the dimmest star to navigate, only to discover that all the stars on Earth are dim, and they wind up getting lost for 2 months. And finally, out of options at the last straw, he decides to employ one last emergency technique that they decide to pull off, called the emergency Urbanizer, which effectively has Yumulak load a special little bullet thing into a loaded gun. He fires this little special sapphire bullet into the ground, and it synthesizes a city made out of nearby materials, which in this case happens to be plant matter, trees, and a whole bunch of other things. After this happens, Yumulak then proceeds to kind of complain about the illogical stuff that's happened in this episode, namely that it started off as a camping trip story, then it went into them being lost in the woods, and now it's a lost in the big city story, and they all have to get jobs. So effectively they find out that not only have they created a thriving city, but that in addition to that, there's still very much wildlife predators that are going to try and kill them. So they quickly realize that they actually need to find jobs if they want, so they can rent a car to get back to their own car. Which, yeah, you can see the problems with that. And everybody expresses their interest in what they're going to do. Korvo hasn't quite figured out what he wants to do, but Yumulak voices his interest in becoming a guy who works in stocks and sales. Jesse decides to work in the fashion industry, and Terry decides he's gonna go off and become an actor. And so they all decide to go and do that. They all go on their separate ways. Korvo winds up knocking out a guy who's stealing a purse, and winds up becoming a mob affiliate in the process. But he keeps getting attacked by wolves, which becomes a recurring plot throughout his little montage that we see. Terry immediately goes to audition, but he's refused an audition, and when he argues about it with the guy judging the audition, the guy then tells him that the only way he could become talent is if he became a prostitute, which Terry is offended by, but eventually he does wind up becoming a prostitute, which yeah. So, and also Jesse winds up getting a job as a secretary for a big fashion industry designer, after the old one is carried off by an owl and gets subsequently fired, which is just adding insult to injury at that point. And Yumulak, he does exactly what he said he's going to do. He, through a contrived series of events, he gets chased by a bear up into a stock exchange office, and quickly goes up the ranks and becomes a successful stock exchange guy. And then we proceed to see several montages. Korvo's is probably the easiest to explain. He keeps getting attacked by wolves, and eventually he gets sick of it, breaks a couple of bottles, and tapes them onto his hand so he can fight back against the wolves before the wolf gets set on fire by a flamethrower by a random passerby. And in addition to that, he explains that he's trying to do a mob story, but it doesn't work because he keeps getting attacked by wolves. So, and also Jesse winds up climbing up the ranks to become a fashion model, eventually becoming the boss of the person she was working with. But it quickly becomes apparent that she's not happy working in the fashion industry all the time, and eventually just shows an interest in actually joining up with the other Slurpians again. Yumulak, meanwhile, has continued to work to climb up the ranks and has become one of the most successful stock exchange guys, but eventually his life does begin to have a downward spiral. Apparently he gets married and has a kid and his wife then proceeds to divorce him. And in addition to that, his facility gets raided by the IRS, and all of his co-workers kill themselves because they would rather die than be raided by the IRS. That kind of happens, and Terry is just kind of unfulfilled with the whole going from sex to sex and just becoming a prostitute. He's not particularly happy with that. But eventually through a contrived series of events, they all wind up going to Jesse's gala that she's being held in her honor, and it's cool. And they all explain how their lives are going and how they're actually going great, even though they're not. And eventually Jesse comes clean and explains that she's actually having a horrible life and that she just wants to work with everybody else again and wants to be a team. And everybody else expresses those interests as well, saying that they know that, with Yumulak explaining that he was fine with them just being a cool alien team, and Terry explaining that he doesn't want to be a prostitute anymore, and Korvo just expressing that he's constantly annoyed by being attacked by wolves. But as they all reconcile and decide to finally rent a car so that they actually find their car, which was their original plan, they suddenly realize that the wolf that Korvo had set on fire is currently rampaging through the city and is setting everything on fire. At which point Terry is able to spy their car from the floor that they're on. And they proceed to make it back to the car before the entire city burns down, and they proceed to head home. At which point Korvo explains that he was a little hesitant about spending time with the replicants at first, but now that he's actually spent time with them for several days, he feels like he's actually grown a little bit closer with them, and it's clear that they've actually emotionally arced. But Korvo proceeds to show disappointment when he finds out that summer vacation is actually over, because they spent however long they were in the city trying to become successful and actually trying to get their money, trying to get out of the city. But Korvo expresses disappointment, not because he's sad to see the replicants go back to school, but because he poisoned them and thought it was 2 months later. So Jesse goes to get the antidote. But as she's going to do that, as it turns out, the wooden city has actually survived the fire. It appeared. They explain how it appeared in like the span of a week, burned down, but then regrew back. and now it's as successful as ever. And while Jesse and Yumulak are a little bit confused as to whether or not the city is actually still around, Korvo immediately turns off the TV and explains that they're never going to go back to the city ever again, only to proceed to completely contradict that by buying a condo in there for Terry and Korvo to actually stay in away from the replicants, so that they can actually have some time away from them, which more or less works. They get attacked by a moose, but other than that, they're pretty much happy and healthy. But that's the A plot. So yeah, again, they continue the murder mystery in the wall. Because while they're all getting lost in the big city, the pupa is just kind of staying there monitoring the wall and what's going on in it. And Halk has apparently come to the conclusion that there is indeed a serial killer in their midst, and that they need to find him. While Enrique and the other guy, whose name I don't remember, they express their concerns as to whether or not Halk is actually working with reality, which ironically he is, but they don't think so because they're just convinced that a cricket did it, and proceed to think that it's a hyper intelligent cricket that's just killing people, and then there's two crickets that are working together, which Halk then dissuades as complete and utter nonsense. But in case he points out that they found a scrap of paper with a 7 on it, and thinks it's a possible clue that the next murder will be in Sector 7. So they go to Sector 7 to investigate a house that seems like it hasn't seen any activity in a long while, and they proceed to raid it. And sure enough, they proceed to poke around a little bit, and it's definitely a mess in there, but they can't find signs of anybody else, so they continue to go in with caution with makeshift crossbows that fire staples. And eventually they go up to the top floor and find a guy on the top floor, but at which point Enrico and the other guy just proceed to completely panic and fire several staples into him, which kills him, with Hulk explaining that they shouldn't have done that because they could have taken him in alive for questioning, which Enrique are completely confused about because they were never told that at all, but expressed that they finally put an end to the serial killings and that he should just be happy that his theory was right. At which point they go back to celebrate with fermented piss. But Hulk feels like something isn't completely right and feels like they didn't actually get the guy. But Enrique and the other guy decide to just blow it off and decide to celebrate instead, only for Hulk to notice something strange about the 7 that he found and decides to go investigate on his own. And as it turns out, he's right. As it turns out, it's not a 7 but an L. And it turns out it's in the Lucky Cookie store, that it leads him to the Lucky Cookie storage where the actual serial killer is. So yeah, he goes to the Lucky Cookers. To the Lucky Cookie storage and proceeds to poke around in there for a little bit with his crossbow, and eventually he comes across a giant fortune and notices that the L is actually ripped out of it. At which point he spies a guy out of the corner of his eye, who then proceeds to break neck speed into the cookie because he realizes he's been followed. And Hulk follows him into the fortune cookie, only to discover his duffel bag and discover that there is indeed a dead body in it, and realizes that this is probably his guy. He proceeds to chase him through the warehouse, with the two firing staples at each other every now and again. It eventually comes to a climax of them being on top of a giant fortune cookie, with Hulk having some flashbacks because he's remembering that how much has actually happened since he was a war hero. And then proceeds to have flashbacks about all the people he couldn't save, which then culminates in a fight between the guy and Hulk. Hulk gets beat up for a little bit, remembering all the injured faces that he saw. But eventually he starts fighting back and is able to actually stop the guy, and the guy punches the cookie instead, which causes them both to fall down and the guy to slide down a fortune and into the wall of the cookie, which knocks him out, enabling Hulk to finally arrest him. So yeah, needless to say, Hulk got the guy, which feels like it's kind of short because, there's still an entire season. They usually have much more lengthy episodes for this, and they usually have a lot more. So I get the feeling there's going to be more development within the wall, because it feels like them catching the serial killer probably isn't going to be the end of that story. It feels like that there's going to be more to the story and more to the whole serial killer thing, because it's a little bit suspicious that the guy was in a warehouse that they were preparing for Sherry Day. So obviously Hulk is a little on edge about whether or not he's actually succeeded in stopping the serial killings. So yeah, that's interesting. So yeah, that's gonna be interesting. So yeah, in any case, there's stuff that feels like they actually just kind of ended it prematurely and that there might actually be more of the story. So I'm looking forward to dissecting that if that is indeed the case. And also the entire arc with the replicants and the main Schlorpians actually growing together and arcing emotionally because they got lost in the woods because Korvo decided to drop them off in the middle of the woods instead of an actual camp. And then that winds up becoming a surviving the big city story. Needless to say, that one's a little bit complicated, and even Yamalaki explains that he wasn't entirely sure what the hell was going on. But yeah, overall, this episode was just fun. Was just funny. It didn't make a whole lot of sense because it kept jumping premises for the A story, and then the B story was just kind of a murder mystery that wound up resolving itself, kind of sort of. Just overall, this episode didn't make any sense, and that was the whole point. So, in any case, yeah, that's my review of Solar Opposites. What did you guys think? Let's get a discussion going in the comment section down below, or over on my Discord server, link in the description. Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Also, be sure to follow me on Facebook and on Twitter in the description below. And also, be sure to check out my Patreon in the description below as well. It's only a couple bucks a month. It really helps me out, and you guys get access to a bunch of cool perks, and I'm always saying thanks. So be sure to check that out. And if you do decide to check that out, then you will be listed on my website. My website has written reviews on it. It has explanations about what I do and who I am. And overall, if you just want to see that, check that out, then I would definitely appreciate it. And also, I have a Twitch up now, so if you want to see me live stream stuff, then I will be doing that every Sunday. Times may vary depending on what I'm doing, but usually I'm gonna try to start around 2:30ish, at least 2:30 Eastern Standard Time. Whatever that winds up translating for you guys, I have no idea, but yeah, our next stream is going to be on Miitopia. If you guys remember, I did a review for that a long time ago. I'm going to be playing the Switch port of it because that's coming out soon. So if you guys want to see me play Miitopia, then be sure to check that out. And also, if you want to see more videos from me, then just be sure to check out the videos linked in the end screen. The top video is the most recent video. It may or may not be this one. Whereas the bottom video is a video recommended to you based on what you've already seen from me. So, if you want to try more of what you like, or try something completely different, then be sure to check both of those videos out. But, regardless of whether or not you do any or all of those things, thank you guys so much for watching, and until next time, I will see you guys in the next video. Peace!